Hello BookTube, my name is Kate and this is my channel Chapter Kate. I have not had like motivation to film or to edit recently. I don't know why. I haven't really been that low. Or at least not lower than normal. I don't know. I just haven't really had filming motivation. But I have it now, so we're gonna get to it. I haven't filmed a wrap up this year at all. It's March. I'm going to film my January, February wrap up now. I'm just going to put them all into one video. Issue being that I read 15 books in February and a good bit of them in January. I have quite a bit of books I've read already this year. So I'm going to try to do this wrap up like as quickly as I can while giving you the information that is relevant in these videos. So yeah. I usually like to go in the order of when I read things, so I'll do January 1st and then I'll do February. For February, there are a couple of books that I got from the library, so I don't have a picture, or I'll put a picture. I don't have the physical book with me. Book number 1 is El Defo by C.C. Bell. So this book is kind of a graphic memoir of her childhood and how she lost her hearing and how she learned to sort of cope with that and cope with the world and cope with the way people viewed her or treated her differently. I decided to read this book because I have an interest in ASL and I've been learning it for a while now. However, there's not a lot of ASL in this book because she talked about how people kind of try to sign at her. So I actually did learn something from that you can't just assume that someone signs just because they are deaf or just because they have a hearing aid or anything like that. You can't really assume things about people that way. Just because someone is deaf does not mean that they are deaf. If it's capitalized, they're usually a part of the culture. If it's not, they usually means that they're not really as involved in that deaf culture. So I really did enjoy this book. I thought it was beautifully written. It was really cute and heartwarming. I thought it was really adorable. The next book was Horror Store by Grady Hendrix, and this is the first horror book. I have a really hard time saying that word. This is the first horror book that I have ever read in my life because I'm a scaredy cat. I can't even watch like mystery like cop shows and movies without like getting scared. So I really enjoyed the way this book is set up. I feel like the fact that Grady Hendrix likes to put humor in his books really softened the blow of that scariness for me. Also the fact that it all occurs in a store that's supposed to be kind of an IKEA knockoff really helped with the fact that when I'm walking my dog in the dark at night, I'm not in an IKEA knockoff, so I can sort of separate myself from the possibilities that like to pop up in my creative little brain. Basically, it's a haunted IKEA knockoff store. But the way this is set up is so cool because it looks like an IKEA catalog, and like at the start of each of the chapters, it's got like a little piece of furniture, but as you get farther in, the furniture starts looking a little bit more creepy. So, like this. And it starts looking like torture devices. So, I really enjoyed this book, and it was so good. Next is I Hate Fairyland by Skottie Young, and Skottie Young is one of the people who create Deadpool graphic novels and comics, and this book was just so funny and creative, and I really loved everything about it. I Hate Fairyland is about a girl who falls into fairyland by chance, and the general idea is that when someone falls, they complete a cute little quest and they get out. However, she's been stuck in fairyland for like 30-something years, and she hasn't solved the quest yet. She's become very hostile as a person. She's still stuck in a tiny little girl body with, you know, her green hair, and she's got a little bit of a murder problem. It was so good. It was so entertaining. I can't wait to read the second one. I have the second one. I just haven't gotten to it yet, so I'm going to get to it, and it's going to be glorious. The next book is Speak, but it was the graphic novel, so a lot of people may have heard of this book. I've never read it until this point. I haven't seen the movie. I think there's a movie, but this is the graphic novel version, and honestly, this was such a gorgeous story. This is by Laurie Halse Anderson, and the artwork is by Emily Carroll. The story is essentially that the main character was raped, and you're kind of discovering sort of what happened, what made the situation worse, her sort of coping with what happened, and getting the help she needs with what happened, and becoming more honest with herself and those around her that are trying to be there for her, or those that have kind of turned their backs on her after the situation. I will say this is highly triggering content, so if sexual assault and rape are triggers of yours, please be careful and just proceed with caution. There's also self-harm in this, which is a huge trigger for me. I sort of just had to take stock of myself and make sure I was in a good place while I was reading this. And also because this is a graphic novel, there are images. So you really, really have to take care of yourself, because some people, they can read something and not see it, and some people can see something and not read it. Just watch out, because it is visual and it can be very triggering. The next book that I read is A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, and like I had quite a few thoughts about this book. It was great. It was just really good. I absolutely loved this entire trilogy. It was so great to finish it off and feel that bit of success, but it was also very bittersweet. I had a really hard time getting through this because, not because it was slow, it was really good, but because when it comes to like the last book in a series, I just don't want it to end, and so I like try to push it off, and eventually, you know, you just have to finish it because, you know, you just have to have that closure. But it was really, really good. I don't want to go over the synopsis of this because if you haven't read the first 2 books, it could spoil something for you, and I would never want to do that. It's just too good. I love it. But I will say something that is really important to me in this trilogy is Delilah Bard. Ever since I started reading the series, I discovered that I saw a lot of myself in Delilah. The way she sort of views gender norms and gender in general. It was very gender nonconforming and possibly on the lines of not being entirely female. I felt myself in that a lot, and I loved seeing that a character not entirely, you know, identifying as female. I just felt so seen in that, and I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. The next book was The Wicked Deep by Shay Earnshaw. This is about a town where every year during this certain time of the year, these 3 witches come back from the, you know, water or whatever and take over 3 girls' bodies and do whatever they want. They drown boys, they do things like that. I was expecting it to be a little bit more fantasy and less paranormal, and it was a little bit more paranormal and less fantasy. But it was beautifully, beautifully written. Also, the cover is beautiful. Look at that. Holographic. It really was a beautiful book. I do think that you have to be open-minded about this, and for me, I had to be open-minded because my expectations were different from what the book was actually about, and I really, really enjoyed the journey that I was taken on. I just wasn't expecting that journey. Next is Alice Isn't Dead by Joseph Fink. This is based on the podcast Alice Isn't Dead, and Joseph Fink also does Welcome to Night Vale. Honestly, I didn't know what to expect going into this book at all. I just expected it to be weird, and it was very weird. I will say that the symbolism in the book is not veiled well. Like, it's there, it's obvious, it's very on the nose. I'm not sure if that's the intention or not, but it is very on the nose. I really, really enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed the way it was written. I will say the pacing is odd. I don't know if it's because it's based on a podcast or what, but the pacing is odd. It doesn't feel like, you know, a story kind of goes like this and sort of reaches a climax and then has a resolution. It didn't feel quite like that to me. I really did enjoy it, but I will say the pacing was a little odd to me because I feel like a lot of books, you kind of are with the character constantly throughout the story. Whereas this one, there was like large kind of gaps of time and things like that that might have been rushed over a little bit. But I did really enjoy it. And this one kind of freaked me out a little bit also. So I had a hard time like taking my dog out in the dark after reading this one because it did creep me out a little bit at times. And the main character in this, I mean, if you're looking for representation, the main character is a black lesbian trucker with anxiety. And she's basically on a search for her wife. Her wife kind of disappeared and was pronounced dead, and then as the main character is watching the news, she starts seeing her wife pop up on these news stories where people have gone missing and stuff like that. So it's very mysterious, and she's like traveling the country trying to find her wife, and it's a lot, but it's really, really good. Next we have Fahrenheit 454. Next we have Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Bradbury. This is the 60th anniversary edition. This is a piece of speculative fiction in the future where firemen kind of set fires instead of, you know, extinguishing them. And they set fires to homes where people have books. Everything is very controlled. The way you think is controlled. You're not allowed to take in information except for what is regulated by, you know, the government. And I think it does pose a very important point that when we start censoring what is put out there, and regulating what is put out there, it's easier for the government to regulate further and close what we are receiving. And I feel like this is a conversation that is always relevant. That's not to say that a piece of fiction cannot be problematic and us call it out as that, but I do believe it is important for readers themselves to decide that and not for it to be regulated by the government. And we've seen this with a lot of banned books over time. Books have been banned for a lot of different reasons that might not be valid to some people and might be valid to others. So it is very important to sort of keep an open mind when it comes to censoring books. And if something is problematic, letting the reader decide that it's problematic. That's just my 2 cents. Not everybody's going to agree with that. And now we're going to get into February's reads, so here we go. In February, we had the vaLITines readathon, which I created it with some of my friends and hosted, and it was just the most fun thing that I've done, and I loved it. I was so proud of it. I was so happy with what it kind of became. I loved it. So I read quite a bit, but I also participated in Blackathon, and I also participated in the BookTube Games, and they were just, can I just say, there were so many amazing readathons and read-alongs in February, and I feel like all the people that hosted them were so supportive of each other, and they were so passionate, and they did such an amazing job. Everyone did, and I think that's pretty great. So first I read Saga Volume 1, but I also read Saga Volume 2 later in the month, so I'm going to talk about both of them. These are graphic novels. They're kind of a space opera that these two people from opposing sides of a war that kind of fall in love, and then there's also people coming after them, and they're, just trying to survive and do their very best. It was riveting. I've only read the first 2. Very rated R, so watch out for that. There's a lot of sexy scenes, and not so sexy scenes that are just kind of gross and you don't want people to see. So, my only issue with the first volume is that it uses the word retarded in a way that is insulting. And I kind of looked at when this was published. This was published in 2016. There was absolutely no excuse for that word to be used in this. There was also the word psychopath used, which we're still working on spreading awareness for how that can be harmful. Not saying that I'm condoning that. I feel like people are less informed about the harm that that word does than the word retarded or retard. So that was disappointing, but otherwise the book was very entertaining. And the second book was even more so. I can't wait to read the rest of the series. Next, I read Lighter Than My Shadow by Katie Green. This thing is so heavy. It is also a graphic memoir about a girl who develops an eating disorder. She also experiences sexual assault. Again, this is another book with very triggering content. Also, the visuals that she creates in this book are just so moving. I cried. I cried a lot with this book. I have never experienced an eating disorder. However, in college, I did experience disordered eating. I barely ever ate. I still have a hard time sometimes, like, eating. It also deals with depression. It also deals with certain compulsive, obsessive-compulsive behaviors, not necessarily obsessive-compulsive disorder, but behaviors that sort of match that. There's also sexual assault in this, so just be aware of that. It's quite thick, so, just set apart a good bit of time, but you can read this pretty quickly. It's just thick, but it's a graphic novel, so it does go by quickly. Then we have Trial by Fire by Josephine Angelini. We did a Trial by Fire read-along hosted by Sarah from Novel Serendipity. This is her favorite book. She gave it all to us. So my card on my camera got full, and so I went to delete some stuff off of it, and I was gone an hour because I got distracted by things. So I'm back. Pretty sure I was talking about this. It was a great book. But anyway, there was a read along. It was great. It was fun. It's basically this chick who with really terrible sickness and allergies ends up finding herself in a parallel universe, and she finds out how to live powerfully rather than sickly. Yeah. We did some really cool challenges with this. Sarah did such an amazing job organizing the event. One of the challenges was to make necklaces based on the story here, and this is mine, and now I kind of feel like it's my friendship necklace with my booktube buddies, so that's why I wear it all the time, because it's important to me. The next was a reread of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I have to say, it lost some of its glamour the second time around. I still really enjoy it as a classic sort of monster story. Really enjoy it. But it wasn't quite as enjoyable for me this time, because I think it's because the entire thing is on the premise of, hey, there's this lady on a boat. Now here's a guy telling the lady his story. Now within that story, there's the monster telling the guy his story, which the guy is telling to the lady. And then it goes back to the guy's story. And I just, yeah. And honestly, I really hate Victor Frankenstein. He's a douchebag. He's a total tool. He can choke. Then I read Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nyan, and this is the only book that I've ever really cared about the romance. And I really loved the world. I loved the idea of the demons. I loved all of it. It was just really, really good. Let's see. Trigger warnings. There is pretty violent, like, sexual assault in here. And it actually, this is the first book I've ever seen, I think, that has a trigger warning in it, and it has, please be aware that this book contains scenes of violence and sexual assault. In addition to that, there's an animal death that I wasn't okay with, because that's a trigger for me personally, is violence towards animals. And so just be aware of that as well. The book itself was beautifully written. It was amazing. I cannot wait for the sequel to it. And I can't believe so many people don't like it. I just really thought it was beautifully written. Next we have The Poetics by Elizabeth Acevedo, and this is my second read of this book. And this time I listened to the audiobook, which was amazing, because if you know anything about this book, it is written in a slam poetry format. The audiobook is the author herself reading it, and I cried several times while reading it, and that used to never happen to me, but all of a sudden I'm a Pisces. Okay, I was already a Pisces, but like, I've gotten more emotional. I think I've just been more honest with myself, and I'm actually allowed myself to feel things now. And I was just very emotional during this, because she has a very strict religious family where she feels very stuck, and I can relate to a lot of the things she goes through. And the ending was just beautiful. The way she views her poetry, I related to so much, because that's the way I've viewed things that I've been passionate about. My, my music, my art in the past, my writing in the past. Things that I create have been like a friend that I needed so desperately. And the way that she personifies and talks about her poetry is just, it was really important to me. And I really loved it. It was amazing. Next we have Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This book is based off West African mythology and also inspired by Avatar: The Last Airbender, and you can see those inspirations in the book, I think, while I'm reading it. However, I feel like it's different enough that I really enjoyed the story. I did see a lot of criticisms for this book that I didn't really agree with, I guess. I thought it was a really riveting read. It was a really fast read because I was so into the story. I was intimidated by this at first because it's a pretty thick book, but it was so good. It was just really good. So read it. I don't know. In this, they're like kind of wiped out magic, and the people that do have magic in them are treated as different and as bad and as, wrong and all this stuff. And there's so many different types of magic, and I think it's beautiful sort of discovering those. There's really great friendships in this, and I feel like that's a really important thing for me in books. There's great friendships. There is a lack of women hate. At the beginning, these two girls kind of don't like each other, but the way that their relationship changes is really beautiful to me. I thought it was a great book. The next one is a graphic novel, and it is On a Sunbeam by Tilly Walden. This is a very thick graphic novel as well. It's very heavy, but it's so beautiful. The illustrations are just so, I love them. They're adorable. They're beautiful. Here's the thing though. There are no men in this book, I've noticed. This is a space opera. These two girls are in love with each other at the school. They get separated, so it's kind of two different timelines. But I didn't really see any men in this. There might be, but I may have missed them. It's pretty much all women. There is one non-binary character, who is a badass ninja type person, but also like really sweet. I love them. But yeah, like I really enjoyed this. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful. And the art was beautiful. The storyline was beautiful. It was so good. Read it. Pretty much this entire video is just going to be me telling you to read things. But it was just so good. And it was somebody crossing like universes just to try and tell this person how they felt. It was everything you need from a good space opera. Then we have A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling, but honestly, it didn't feel like a retelling as much as sort of an Alice in Wonderland inspired story. Because you don't really see the parallels between the two stories, but it is really beautiful. Also, the cover is really gorgeous. I love it. It's got this Argyle. You can't really see it so well in there, but you can kind of see the reflection. It's got like this Argyle situation. It's really gorgeous. I listened to this about half on audiobook, and then I read half pretty much. And I really did enjoy this. The main character sort of runs into the Hatter. You okay? The main character sort of runs into like the Hatter character, and she's able to sort of train and become this sort of awesome monster hunter type person that fights these nightmares in Wonderland. And nightmares are basically like manifestations of fear, and they have to kill them in Wonderland before they get into the real world and cause a lot more havoc and are a lot stronger. It completely skips her like training to do this. It goes straight from, here, this is what you're going to be doing, to, a year later when she's skilled. So there is no training there, which was probably one of my few like criticisms of it. I did have a couple of criticisms, that was one of them. I felt like the relationships weren't as strong as they could be in this, but I did like a lot of the ways that certain things were explained in here. I feel like this book needed to be bigger. I feel like a lot of things would have done better with more explaining. Some things were like a little bit too convenient. Other things, it felt like they were just kind of put in there just for the sake of it, when they could have been maybe developed more and seemed more like they were supposed to be there. But yeah, it was a good book. It just wasn't, I don't think it was flawless. I don't know if any book is flawless, but I did have some critiques about it, but it was really good. The next book is Elevation by Stephen King. This is my first Stephen King book, and I just thought I'd get a small one to to say I read one. But I used to actually live on a street called Elevation something, and it was in a neighborhood called Castle Rock, so I thought I had to read this book, and that was years ago, so. But it's about this man who keeps losing weight and they don't know why. And it's obviously concerning, because if you keep losing weight, you're not really doing anything to lose weight. You're eventually going to dwindle away to nothing. And it's just, I thought this was really interesting. I would have liked this to actually be a bigger book, because I felt like certain things could have had more to them. I felt like the relationships could have been developed even more. It did feel like a well-developed short story, but I wish it could have been more of a story, which is funny because it feels like most of Stephen King's books, the criticisms I've heard is that they could be shorter. This one obviously could be longer. But it's good, and I feel like it's interesting to see the character growth that the main character goes throughout the book, and how he changes his perceptions, and how he starts kind of viewing his own life and own purpose. The next two were library books, and they were graphic novels, and it was Cyborg Volume 1, The Imitation of Life, and Cyborg Volume 2, Danger in Detroit. I've been wanting to read Cyborg comics for a while because I loved him in Teen Titans, so I finally found some at the library that I could read, because everywhere I went to buy them, I never found them. So I did find them immediately at the library, which was awesome. My only criticism of these is that they kind of felt cheesy at times, as comic books can, because it was a bunch of comics put into, you know, an actual volume. It felt like he always recapped when it started a new comic in that volume, and I really don't like when characters recap, like, oh, you're this guy that did this thing, like, a page ago, and he he basically summarizes the entire book before, and that's a pet peeve of mine in comics, and it did it a lot. But I do believe that the relationships were really well developed. It was nice to see more into Cyborg, and see more into sort of what created him, what his mind is like, and the relationships he has with those around him, and that I really, really did enjoy. Next was The 5th Season by N.K. Jemisin. This was an absolutely beautiful fantasy world. I did find myself getting confused a couple of times and having to sort of go back and sort of clear things up, but essentially the people in these books have the ability to sort of suck out the energy around them and move like stone and minerals. And can the motorcycle stop, please? People in this book are able to suck the energy out from the world around them and sort of create these like earthquake type things. They can move stones and move rocks and do a lot of kind of wild things like that. It starts off with 3 separate point of views, and it kind of simplifies as it goes on. And I think it's interesting that one of the point of views is second person, so it's like talking to you as if you are the main character, and I thought that was cool, because I don't know if I've read a book like that before that didn't refer to me as the reader. So that was really cool. That was really cool. Things to watch out for are infanticide, child abuse, child neglect. I'm not sure if I'm missing any others, but those are some of the ones to watch out for. But there are these beings that can do these things, and there's also a sort of race of these guardians that can kind of control those beings, and those guardians have taken it upon themselves to control them, and that can be harmful when they don't always have the best interests of them in mind. It's very good, but it's also very intense. It's also very complex. So this one is going to probably require a reread for me when I do pick up the second one, because there was just so much detail, or at least I might have to reread some summaries or synopses of it, so that way I can make sure I know what I'm talking about and thinking about when I go into reading it again or continuing the series. But it was well done, and I really found myself caring about the characters and caring about their relationships with each other. There's also polyamory in this. There is a 3-person relationship at one point, and it was cool to see that in a book. It was cool to finally actually like see that presented, because those exist. Then we have The Art of War by Sun Tzu. If you haven't heard of The Art of War, it's a very small book, and it's basically a bunch of war tactics, and it's still taught in military academies today. I thought it was really interesting to look at it from a civilian perspective. It has certain things like, if your soldiers are retrieving water but they first drink it before bringing it back, then that means that they're thirsty. It has some things that seem like no-brainers, but those in leadership positions may not think about, because obviously in war there's a million things to think about. So I did think it was very interesting to read. And those were all of my books for January and February of this year. Yeah, I know this is super late. I don't care. And now it's time for a Booktuber Spotlight. Today's Booktuber Spotlight is Allie from The Nature of Pages. Allie's videos are always so heartwarming to me. She has proclaimed herself a Hufflepuff in her videos, and I feel like she is like the personification of a Hufflepuff. She's just so easy to love, and she's so sweet, and I just enjoy her, and I want to be as cool as her when I grow up. She also makes musical videos, which I absolutely adore, and during February she also made a BookTube Games like video, and it was just so well done. I wish I had friends that I could make BookTube videos with, because I'm super jealous, and I also wish I had that amount of energy. If you want some just great, wholesome BookTube content, you should check her out. I also just realized that she tagged me in a thank you next book tag, and I haven't done it, so I need to do that because I love her and I don't want to disappoint her. I cannot wait to meet her at BookCon. But yes, please go check her out. Please follow her. Yes, she's great. Comment below with your favorite read so far of this year. And that's all for this video. If you would like more of this junk, subscribe below. Bye! Tripping over shadows and I'm drowning in the night. I feel the soldiers coming and I'm putting up a fight.